If you like this video, don't forget to give it a giant thumbs up. If you are new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the little notification bell. Hi everyone, how are you guys doing today? As you already might know that I recently tried the mini Lila palette by Natasha Denona and it didn't really work out for me. I didn't like the formula and I did not care for the shades as much as the actual big Lila palette. So I ended up returning it, and when I returned it, that time itself I had decided that I will look into her future palettes because I really liked the size that it was and the cost that it was. So when the buzz started that she was going to come out with the mini star, and the mini star palette is going to have 5 shades from the actual star palette, I was super excited. I have been obsessed with the big star palette ever since Tati did her WTF $169 palette video. It was a no-brainer. I was going to grab it. I had it in my Sephora cart, but then I realized, oh, I have some store credit. So I went to Sephora. So there it was, the mini star palette. I put it in my cart and the big star palette was right next to it. So I swatched both the palettes side by side, and as you can see in the swatches, the mini star palette was not as pigmented and as shiny in terms of shimmers as the actual star palette, and that was very disappointing. I came home, watched a few parallel or side-by-side comparison videos, and came across this video by Kaisley Brianna J, where she kind of confirmed what I had found in the swatches, that the pigmentation in the mini palette is not as good as the big palette. So then in my head I was like, oh my god, I am going to buy the big star palette. I should start saving for it and wait for the big Sephora sale, you know, this season. And then I was like, you know what, I should look in my collection and see if I can find dupes just like I did for the Norvina palette. And I actually found all the shadows from the star mini palette in one single palette. And I was so excited that I was like, you know what, I have to sit down, record a video, but I had to first make sure that I could actually create all the looks that Natasha Denona has created using the mini star palette, because she is an amazing artist. And I was like, if this dupe does not stand up to that, there is no point in sharing with you guys, right? So I have created these 3 looks using the dupe, and you guys already know from the thumbnail that the dupe is from Colourpop. And what I'm talking about is the Perception by Shayla X Colourpop palette. And I'm very glad that it is actually a YouTuber collab that ends up duping the entire mini star palette. So these are the shades in it. And I think I really like the dupe looks that I have come up with. They look almost exactly the same. I also have a couple of other palettes that dupe some of the shades from the mini star palettes, which I will share with you in a minute. But let's first talk about the Perception palette. This one is, I think, one of the more expensive palettes on Colourpop. This one retails for $23 as opposed to most their 16 pan palettes, which retail for about $18. In here you get 16 shades, and each shade is 1.1 grams. So I think each shade in this palette is actually bigger than their standard palettes. You get a total of 17.5 grams of product. If you look at the total cost, this is $23. The Star Mini palette is $25, so there's not that much of a difference in here. But the Star Mini palette only contains 4 grams of product. If you're like me, that really holds no ground, because honestly, I never go through any eyeshadow palette, you know, before it's going to just, things are going to expire on me and grow mold before I finish any eyeshadow palettes that I own. Okay, so that really doesn't hold any ground. But if you're interested, you can see that this one actually holds 4 times the product. And I think the shadows in here are beautiful. For some reason, the shadows in the mini star palette don't swatch as well. I have no idea why. Of course, I have not used that palette over my eyes. But if you look up that video by Kaisley Brianna J, she has done a side-by-side, you know, eyeshadow comparison of the Star Mini with the actual star palette. And you can see that even in actual application, the quality of the mini star falls short. I have no idea if the mini palettes have a different formula, or if her formula has just changed ever since she created the star palette, or just the way that shadows need to be pressed in those smaller, maybe possibly shallower pans is different, and they end up being compressed further than the actual big palette, and that's why they don't, you know, get picked up as easily. I don't know what the deal is, but the fact of the matter is that it doesn't work as well. But we have almost exact dupes in this palette. So the most exciting shade I think in the mini star palette is Orion, which is this like shifty duochrome, you know, blue to green to burgundy or brown shimmer. And we have Sassy in here. The first time I actually swatched Sassy, when I took this palette out of the box, I was like, it's so buttery. I think it's better than any other Colourpop shadows that I want. I have no idea why, but this one has a different formula and it just like swatches and swatches and swatches, and look at that, like it's beautiful. Bellatrix is a high shine pinkish beigey shimmer, and in the Sheila Colourpop palette we have a shadow called Spill the Tea. I think it is just as high shine. In one of the looks that I have created today, this shadow is applied all over the lid and you will see how shiny this one is. And then the last shimmer in the Star Mini palette is Cosmo. It is slightly more greener than the shadow TF in the Sheila Colourpop palette. So you can say that this is probably not an exact dupe, but you know, I'm going to show you another dupe for this particular shadow. And then the two mattes in the Mini Star palette are Attic and Earth. Attic is a little bit more cool toned than the shadow Culture in the Sheila Colourpop palette. And Earth is, I think, almost exactly like played out in the Colourpop palette. So this is kind of the entire palette for you. The shimmers are almost as good as the Star palette. They are better, I think, than the Mini Star palette. But I feel like the mattes in the Star palette and the Mini Star palette are a little bit more powdery. And when they're like that, they apply slightly better. The ones in the Colourpop palette are slightly more compressed. They still apply just as fine, as you will see in the looks, and I had no problem using them. However, you know, I had to point out that difference for you. Now, of course, besides these 5 shades, you get a bunch of other shades. So if you feel like you can kind of deepen Culture using these 2 shadows, if you want to warm it up, you can use the shadow Thick if you want to kind of make it more reddish. You can use the shadow Revenge, and you know, you can kind of play around with the palette. If I want to get an exact match for Cosmo, the tarnished gold shimmer, which is the only shimmer that's kind of missing from this palette, I felt like if I mixed IE and TF, you get an exact match. So that way now you have the entire palette duped. And I feel like this is almost a complete dupe for the palette. You get more product, and I think it actually swatches better than the Mini Star palette. So I would highly recommend picking this one up. They recently had like a 20% sale or something on Colourpop. That's when I bought mine. I also picked up 2 of the lipsticks. This one is Come On Sis. That's what I'm wearing on my lips today. I also picked up Scorpio Moon from the Kathleen Lights Zodiac palette. And those are pretty nice. They are not as great as, you know, the hype that I've heard on social media texture wise, but I like the colors. As I told you guys earlier, I have a couple of other dupes as well, which are not the complete dupe, and that's why I did not really play with them. However, this look I'm wearing is using the shadows from these other dupes. I have used, of course, all the mattes from the Perception palette, but for the shimmers, I have gone in this Saharan palette by Juvia. And in this, you get actually the almost exact dupe of the shadow Cosmo, this greenish gold shadow. You have a dupe for the duochrome shadow as well. It's slightly different. As you can see, this is more vibrant. Personally, I like this one better than that. That one has beautiful texture, but you know, color wise, I like this one better. And then you also get kind of, you know, a beigey matte and some other shadows, which I don't think are very close dupes, so I'm not going to swatch them today. Another palette I had to talk about because it has been my favorite for years almost, you can say, and it's the Comfort Zone palette from Wet n Wild. And this particular shadow in it is pretty famous. This is the duochrome shadow. And then I feel like this shadow could be a dupe for Bellatrix. I feel like this palette has a closer dupe for Orion because the shift in it is more apparent. And then of course I had to talk about this particular shadow in the NYX Fire palette, which is also another beautiful option for Orion. So there you go. So these are all the dupes I have for you guys. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this dupes video. I of course had a lot of fun swatching all these shadows. Have you guys tried the Star Mini palette? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you tried the Makeup by Shayla Perception palette? I would love to hear your thoughts on that palette as well. Oh, by the way, I do have a dupe for the Blue Dahlia shade from the Lila Mini palette. So make sure you're subscribed and the little notification bell is rung for when that video goes up. Thank you again for joining me. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.